First of all, can you introduce yourself, tell the listeners a bit about your background, and why that makes you a good candidate to represent them in Westminster?
Absolutely. So, my name's Sam. I'm currently a biomedical researcher working on cancer detection methods, and I'm also a councillor over in Cambridge where I work. I'm the cabinet member there responsible for parks and open spaces, as well as various other operational services delivered by about 250 staff in total. My other bit of background is in education. I teach biology at a university level, and I'm just coming up to 2 years, the end of 2 years, as one of Cambridge University's 25 trustees, so the people who have overall responsibility for running the university. That's tied in quite well with another bit of my council work, as I'm one of the councillors on the skills committee of the combined authority, which covers all of Cambridge and Peterborough. So I've been involved in improving skills and further education right across the region, including in northwest Cambridgeshire. I think there's various bits in there to unpick in terms of why that background makes me a good candidate to be Northwest Cambridgeshire's MP. So let's start with the science. I don't think we've got enough scientists in Westminster. Over the course of the pandemic, that was really made quite clear when we were struggling to get our representatives to make evidence-based decisions and really get to grips with the flood of data and information that the whole country was being presented with on a daily basis. More MPs with a science background will help with Parliament's ability to use solid evidence and data in making decisions rather than being driven by ideology, like I would argue we're seeing at the moment. As for my time in local government, that's given me a lot of experience in looking after public money. So, balancing budgets, making services as efficient and effective as possible, that kind of thing. I'm responsible for about £17 million of public spending every year at the moment. So I really do mean it when I say I have that experience. And we really need that in Westminster too, to contribute to getting the economy back on track, but also to reforming public services, particularly the NHS, to make them work better for people. And on the local level, why I'd be a strong representative, I'd point to the record I have in my ward. I've secured funding for a variety of different local projects, so I'd be able to sort of fight for the constituency in that sense. It's the same sort of skill set there. And I've developed a strong reputation for getting casework done for people. Separately to that, going back to the point about being a university trustee, I've spent a lot of time looking at employment issues and reforming things to get a better deal for staff. So to sum all that up, really, I've got a really diverse mix of skills and experience that will make me a strong and effective advocate for people all across the constituency if I'm elected.
What's your personal motivation for standing in this year's election?
Well, I grew up in a very, very apolitical family, and I did not give politics or politicians, to be honest, the slightest thought for most of my life growing up. I was someone who thought politicians were all the same, all liars, out for themselves, you name it. But I was very aware of my area declining over time. Lots of empty shops on my local high street was a big part of that, and the other big one was that my school was really struggling financially. It had to shut courses and eventually close down its sixth form. And in a rural area, that meant a lot of local people suddenly faced stupidly long journeys to and from school and college. The moment I actually connected a lot of that stuff to politics was during the pandemic, when in 2020, I was one of the first wave of students whose A level exams got cancelled by the government. And the government decided to use an algorithm to assign grades. And I knew lots of people who missed university offers because of that, including me, actually, until the government U turned on its decision. And all the chaos around that made something click for me. And now I realise that all that decline I was seeing in schools, high streets, you name it, was due to political choices. The government chose to deprive rural schools like mine of funding by changing the formula. That's a decision that they made. So that got the ball rolling for me in terms of political involvement. And since being elected into local government, I have seen more and more of the reality behind what the Conservatives have done to public services in this country. They have brought the NHS, schools, the police, and councils to their absolute knees and left huge numbers of people in real need. So, my motivation for standing is to fight back against that and deliver change. We deserve better than this national decline and decay that's plagued us under this government. And linking into what I was just saying before, I feel I have the skills and experience to really deliver change, not just nationally with Labour, but locally in northwest Cambridgeshire as well through strengthening our communities.
Peterborough City Council's funding from central government has been cut by over 37% in real terms since 2016 and 70% since 2013. The results of this have been cuts in services and a rising council tax of over 40%. What will you and your party do to ensure the city gains the financial support it requires to continue to provide the services that its citizens both want and need?
Yeah, that's a pretty damning but very accurate indictment of the perilous situation that a lot of councils find themselves in right now. Not just Peterborough, it is a national picture, but Peterborough is very much one of those councils. And this slow trickle of councils going bankrupt that we're seeing is the inevitable conclusion of 14 years' worth of cuts from the Conservatives. They've actively told councils to keep putting council tax up to replace that money. And then when we do so in Labour areas, they then launch political attack adverts about how Labour just loves putting your council tax up. You know, the opportunism there is absolutely galling. And the guidance earlier this year to councils literally advised councils struggling to balance their budgets to sell off assets to fund their services. Now, rule number one of sustainable finance is that if in a given year you sell things to get one-off lumps of cash, and then you use that to cover costs that arise every single year, you're going to find yourself the following year in a much worse mess. Anyone with common sense can see that is not sustainable, and yet that was the official advice coming from the Conservatives in the government guidance. I can't speak for others, but I personally read that quite plainly as them giving up, thinking they won't win the election, and therefore they're not going to bother doing anything about council finances. They can just leave that to Labour to sort out. It is just astonishing. But if we win, we will sort it out. One of the first things we do is award multi-year funding settlements, which sounds awfully dry, but basically means we'll tell councils how much money they'll get for a few years at a time, which will really help to reduce uncertainty and help councils make savings in all sorts of things, procurement being an obvious example, because it lets us sign longer contracts. We also plan to end what I like to call the begging bowl culture in local government, where there are small pots of grant money made available by the government, and councils have to bid against each other for a slice of it, meaning they put loads of their own resource into drawing up detailed plans and proposals that are then not funded. There is an unbelievable amount of time and money wasted to all the places that is happening, and it is happening literally all over the place. There are lots of alternatives that retain the same level of scrutiny and accountability, so central government could still be confident that councils were delivering maximum value for their funding. And it's also just worth saying that we will directly provide more funding as well to deliver services that are buckling. So, for example, we've committed to directly fund additional planning officers because there's a lot of pinch points in planning services at the moment. And we'll pay for that by increasing stamp duty for non-UK residents that are buying houses here.
It's been said that Peterborough is an NHS dental desert, with people having to travel 50 miles to find one. There are also constant complaints about the difficulties of getting the appointment at the city's GPs, with appointments for the day gone by 1 minute past 8. What will you do to see a rapid improvement in that situation?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right in your assessment of the situation there. I've met residents that are having to go to Stevenage for a dental appointment. And of course, we are all too familiar with the 8 a.m. scramble for a GP appointment. Completely unacceptable situation that is causing misery and putting lives at risk, to put it bluntly. I would argue that the Conservatives have spent 14 years asleep at the wheel. And now NHS waiting lists have grown so long that people are getting significantly more ill while they wait for appointments, meaning treatment is harder, takes more time, costs more for the NHS, and takes more appointments, including GP appointments, because people have to go back about secondary symptoms and complications. It's a vicious cycle of decline. The last Labour government slashed waiting times massively. I'm very proud of our record on that. And if we're elected on the 4th of July, we will do it again. So one of our 6 first steps, the things we want to do immediately if we win, is to deliver 40,000 extra NHS appointments per week by paying staff overtime to do extra shifts on evenings and weekends. Now, that's been trialled successfully in some areas. So the evidence base is there for us to say that it will work nationally, and we'll fund it by cracking down on non-dom tax loopholes and other tax avoidance by the mega rich. That will help us to get a grip on the waiting lists. But to make our system sustainable in the long term, we are committed to training thousands more GPs and bringing back the concept of the family doctor. So patients see the same GP, meaning if you've got an ongoing or complex condition, that's dealt with much more effectively, and a lot of doctors' time is saved. We also need better public health measures to keep people healthy, like banning the promotion of vaping and junk food to young people. Labour will deliver those measures, so we can tackle the causes of some common diseases too, and that will also help to reduce the demand we have on GPs. On dentists specifically, we're pledging to introduce a dentistry rescue plan with details to provide an extra 700,000 urgent dental appointments and recruit new dentists to areas like Peterborough that need them most. And we'll also work to improve retention of NHS dentists so we see less moving over into the private sector, because we're losing a lot of people to that at the moment.
Peterborough's population grew by 17% between 2011 and 2021, the third fastest growth in the country. What's your plan or policy on where housing should be built in and around the city over the next 10 years?
Peterborough is absolutely a fast growing city, as is Cambridge, so the whole region is a huge growth area. But I think we often fall into this trap of thinking that new housing developments automatically have to clash with our goals around preserving the environment and such like, which isn't the case. Housing can be built in really high quality developments. I know we're going to talk briefly about the showground later on. The preserve open space for people, often actually enhancing an area's biodiversity value by providing better quality habitats than just open grassland. You know, a field is not particularly helpful for animals and biodiversity and plants and such like. Within the context of the development, you can have so many different microhabitats and just develop a much better ecosystem. So it's a bit of a win-win if you do it right in most cases. That's not necessarily happening at the moment, I have to say. I've spent time canvassing all around the constituency and talking to people, and this issue has come up sometimes. I was recently in the sort of new development around South Stanground, and I really think we can up our game in terms of designing places that work for people. It's things like well-located parks, even just things like little verges on streets and some trees here and there to shade some areas so that kids have places to play. It's things as easy as that. You just have to think these things through. And when development is done right, it causes a lot less unease. As for where we build housing, I'm not going to pretend to have the plan for exactly what areas we'd want to focus growth on. These things do change over time as economic conditions sort of wax and wane, and as businesses come to the city in different areas, and sort of a lot of it depends on where they're situated. The area around the Hamptons is obviously growing very rapidly, and it might make sense to put some more emphasis on that southwestern area of Peterborough, looking to then build in better transport infrastructure in the future. That's the other point. It's about making sure that development of new housing happens alongside growth in the public services that the residents are going to need.
A report produced last year stated that for the city to reach net zero, it would cost in the region of £8.8 billion. What actions will you take to promote environmental sustainability and address climate change locally without bankrupting the council?
That's a fair challenge, and Labour is being very honest with people about what we can do environmentally. You know, I think it's a huge priority for all of us, young people especially, and we're putting forward some really ambitious stuff about bringing the UK over to clean power by 2030. That is a really ambitious pledge, given, you know, how much we will have to do in the next 5.5 years to do that. But we are up for that challenge, and we're confident we can deliver it. And we'll do it using our new publicly owned energy company, Great British Energy, to really invest in green energy, but also the underlying stuff behind it. Skills in retrofitting, for example, as there's a real lack of people in our economy that have those skills at the moment to go in and, you know, retrofit homes to be less demanding of energy, water, and other resources. So it's kind of two-phased. It's about the investment in the infrastructure, but also in the skills and the people, so that that can then become self-sustaining in the future. Because that is economically beneficial to people. You know, people will pay to retrofit their homes and such like, because that will then bring down their bills. So it's a win-win for everybody. We just got to provide the services that can do that work and people. There's some work to do around reframing exactly what it is we're doing here. Decarbonising is actually a real opportunity, as I just said, for businesses to cut their energy costs. So they want to do it as it's financially very sensible for them in the long run. And we'll support them in making that investment through a national wealth fund to support the most intensive sectors that use the most energy in the moment to decarbonise. For the council specifically, that's obviously a small part of the whole city's carbon footprint, with private residents and businesses being the majority there. But councils can also take strong decisions to invest in decarbonising themselves and to really set an example for the partners that they work with, which are really credible long-term investments that free up money to spend on services. So I'd also want to have a real dialogue with the City Council about the ways we can support it to do that. And there are other things we can do nationally that will benefit the city locally a great deal. We have a particularly strong financial services industry in the UK, particularly in London. What that means is that that's involved in mobilising a lot of private capital, including for project initiatives. So we'll harness that by regulation to help pressure companies that are clients of that financial services industry to develop and implement credible transition plans that align with the 1.5 degrees warming goal of the Paris Agreement.
This year sees the first time in over 50 years that Speedway hasn't been taking place in the city after the Panthers were told they could no longer use the track at the showground. Would you support the Panthers to get back racing? And if so, how?
Yeah, I have a huge amount of sympathy for the Panthers and all their supporters. I'm going to be out campaigning in Alton Northgate and Southgate quite soon. I'll have been around all those areas theoretically when this podcast comes out, so I'm still very much in listening mode about the showground development. But broadly speaking, I think it should be a really positive addition to the city. Though I'm not thrilled at the level of affordable housing being provided on site. It's 30% at the moment, and I think we can do better than that. We expect 40% as a bare minimum in Cambridge, so higher standards are possible. So well, it's not really the developer's fault there, I guess, because maximised profit is going to be their key objective. But really, to bring up development standards, we need the council to pass a more ambitious local plan than the one the Conservatives put through in 2019. So I'd be keen to work with the council on doing that if I'm elected. On the Speedway, I do want to be honest with people when we talk about how an MP can help with what is essentially a planning issue. And in truth, my influence would be limited. I can raise concerns through the planning process, and I'm more than happy to do that. But I'd only be doing so as a private citizen because fundamentally planning is something that the council is responsible for and not the MP. MPs often don't have power. What they have is a voice when it comes to local issues. And of course, given planning permission has been granted for the development, the opportunity to have much influence there is quite limited at this stage. And I think to back that up, you just have to look at the current situation with the showground. The incumbent Conservative MP has raised concerns. He's done that work. He's outlined what I outlined above to his credit, but it hasn't helped. We are still in this situation. What I can absolutely say is that I really do empathise with the club, and I would be more than happy to meet them and supporters if I were elected to engage directly about the kinds of ideas we might be able to put in place in terms of finding a local home for them potentially elsewhere in the city. But I can't claim to have the solution here and now to what is a very, very difficult problem. After all, so much time and effort has been put in by other local politicians to find an answer to it. So there is still a long way to go.
There's a feeling among some Peterborough residents that the city is treated like the poor cousin of Cambridge. How will you ensure that the city gets its fair share and becomes an equal county partner with Cambridge?
I think you raise a fair point there. And for me, it's about recognising the industries that Peterborough is particularly strong in and helping to develop those so that the two cities can complement one another and work together to strengthen the regional economy in that way. At a quite broad level, Cambridge is brilliant at generating lots of ideas, particularly in terms of science and technology. But Peterborough really has the expertise to turn those ideas into products and services. So the message I want us to be giving businesses is that this is where you want to be. You get access to arguably the best innovation environment in the country on your doorstep over in Cambridge. And within Peterborough itself, you have access to enormous expertise in logistics and manufacturing, as well as expertise in how to set up and run a business. Peterborough has a really high proportion of people employed in business administration and support services. So there is just such a wealth of experience there to tap into. So for me, that's the answer to the question. Generating ideas and actually turning them into products and services are two sides of the same coin, and neither one can thrive without the other. So we are in such a unique situation because I can't name any other place in the country where you have two cities with such strong expertise in different areas that can complement one another so effectively. As for how we make that vision actually happen, I think there's a lot to be said about making things easier for businesses, and Labour's set out a lot of plans around that in our manifesto. But one of the biggest things for me is investing in effective skills and higher and further education in the city and making that training available to businesses. Nationally, that means having a proper industrial strategy, which we want to bring in, and it means fixing various funding pots like the apprenticeships levy, which are subject to stupidly rigid rules about what is and isn't eligible. So that in turn puts up many barriers to businesses that want to upskill their employees and offer apprenticeships and such like. Locally, ARU Peterborough is really trailblazing on some of that stuff. I'm really proud of the investment we've made in that. But without the government focus on really supporting a strong environment for investment and innovation, there's only so much we can do locally, which is one of the reasons I'm so excited about the possibility of Labour winning this election and really being able to put a really fleshed out local vision on that front into practice.
What is the biggest challenge facing Peterborough over the next 5 years?
It's really hard to boil it down to one, isn't it? We have a crumbling NHS. We have schools literally crumbling with the rat crisis. In the Northwest Cambridgeshire constituency, there's about 10 violent crimes being committed every single day. With 90% of crimes going unsolved, that's only 1 in 10. That's what anyone's actually doing anything about. And we're physically seeing the area declining through things like the appalling state of the roads, which is one of the easiest visual ways you can say it. I think the answer to the question just has to be the continuing stress all of our public services are under, especially as the city continues to grow. Some politicians see the answer to that problem as being within the growth. Often I find when I'm on a panel with someone from the Green Party, this is one of the biggest areas we disagree, because they often just say, well, we must therefore stop growing. But that's not a viable solution in my mind. We have so many people that need affordable housing, that need employment, and every part of the UK needs to do its bit to provide that. Our area in particular is an area that is growing. There's so much it contributes to the economy. So we can't shy away from the kind of national responsibilities that we do have there. And I'm not afraid to say that. So really, the solution from my perspective is to make sure that growth is sustainable, making sure, new developments make provision for doctors, schools and such like, and making sure that they're designed in a way that reduces crime through various mechanisms, so we reduce the stress on the police. And, it's about just making sure that we take people along with us as we do that, because you end up with so many situations where a growing city is almost, you have the people who are currently in the city almost at odds with businesses and people who want to move there. And you should never be in that situation. Investment in your city is a good thing, but it needs to be done with people, and people need to be brought along with it so people can see the benefits and people can contribute as well, because local people often can dramatically improve planning applications just with the application of a bit of common sense. So, yeah, that's perhaps not too easy to visualise at the moment, just because our public services are in such a bad state. But if Labour wins and we're able to start delivering change, then we'll start to get to grips with that.
Why are you and your party the best choice for people to give their vote to this year?
So, speaking to residents on the doorstep in this campaign so far, I've been really shocked to find that the Conservatives have never actually called around to hear residents' views in most areas of North West Cambridgeshire. In over 30 years of having a Conservative MP, people are being taken for granted, and that needs to stop. We need an accessible, visible local MP who takes the time to get out there and actually speak to residents, as I'm doing right now, and as I would do throughout my time in office. On the question itself, well, in a word, it is that Britain needs change. Over the last 14 years, we have seen a worsening spiral of decline. Families weighed down by soaring mortgages, people waiting on trolleys in A&E, sewage in our rivers, kids not able to get school places, you name it. And only Labour can deliver that change. I really hate the tactical voting message, because I want people to vote Labour because of our strong vision and plans, but I will give that message anyway. North West Cambridgeshire is a two-horse race. The election will be won either by the Conservatives, who have caused this decline and decay, or by me and the Labour Party, who have a strong vision for change. And we really can win it this time if residents believe in us and back me. So a vote for Labour is a vote to end the chaos. It is a vote to take back our streets from crime and antisocial behaviour with more police. It is a vote to get the NHS back on its feet with more appointments. It is a vote to cut energy bills with Great British Energy and a transition to clean power. It is a vote to secure our economy and never again allow a repeat of the mini-budget that sent mortgages soaring. And it is a vote to revitalise education and break down the barriers to opportunity.
Sam Carling, Labour candidate for North West Cambridgeshire, thank you for joining me on the Politics of Peterborough.
Thank you, it's been an absolute delight.